Okay, well, let's jump into Mittel Mosel first. Let me pull up the map. In So have you been to the Mosel markets? Have you visited the region?
Oh, yeah, plenty of times.
So can you give us like an overview? I have the map here of like the river, like the region, the villages, and the Slate slopes. How do they all interact? Can you kind of give us a visual of this whole area?
So it's always interesting when I work with wine, when I work with grapes, when I work in the store to find my right bottle of wine. I always want to know, where am I? So we talked a little bit that we are fairly high north. So we are 50 plus degree latitude. That means in general it's fairly cold. What we also have is a diurnal range. What that means is that the day temperature and the night temperature have a pretty big difference. So it gets nice and cold at night and fairly warm now these days during the day. So Riesling grapes love that. They absorb the heat. They make the sugar come in, but it retains the acidity at night because the grapes stop to produce sugar during the summertime. Why do I mention that? So when you come to the Mosel is attached, so to speak, to the Rhine River. So if you're in Koblenz, you come to a little corner where the Mosel comes into the Rhine. You make a left, almost like on a freeway, and there it goes. You go in. It's a pretty narrow stretch first. So that's why we call it at the beginning is a Terrassenmosel. So there's terraces at the beginning because it's simply too steep. Otherwise, to grow the grapes, it's too steep for any slopes, and also too many rocks. So if the valley has not a certain width or direction, you have to be in the terracing. So you don't have another choice than going that way. You come up. You come up into the Mittel Mosel, where then it gets slightly flatter. We're still looking at inclines of 65 to 68 degrees. So still fairly steep slopes. And then you go all the way up to Trier, and then we are there in the Upper Mosel, and then from there it goes you have a connection to the Saar. You also have the Ruwer just before that, where it's not a river belonging to the same wine region. Before then, the river actually goes all the way to Luxembourg. And if you really want to be correct, well, actually the source from the Mosel is in Luxembourg and runs into the Rhine. So it's actually exactly the opposite way. When you look at this map, this is a pretty old map. This is actually one of probably the most famous map. And you see number one is how the river has these turns and twists. So it's extremely scenic. It's still a heavy traffic when it comes to moving, especially wood, coal, rocks up and down the river. So that's still pretty decently used for transportation. But it's absolutely unique when you walk up in the vineyards and you always see the Mosel on your side. It's very, very picturesque. If you look at the different coloration of the Mosel around the Mosel, you can see the vineyard sites. So back in the day, so this is a fairly old map. If you want to plant a vineyard, so as we mentioned, we want the exposure to the river. That means that's where the UV light, that's where the reflection from the sun, and that's also where the warmth is, right? Because the water is actually storing the heat and then releases it slowly back into the atmosphere in the evening when the air around it gets cooler. So it's intensely a little warmer around the river. And they're all south facing or southwest facing. So the vineyards, they want to capture that. The vineyard captures the very last, the sun is more intense in the afternoon. So they capture always the very last of the warmth to grow these grapes to a point where they actually can make wine. So there's enough sugar in them, even back in the days. And you see all these top vineyard sites, they're all along the river. And they're mainly exposed to the west. And so up to today, they have not really changed at all. Some of them have really coming out, or they have been replanted, but we have a lot of material here which can go back easily 100 plus years. We also should know that the Mosel was not really that much involved in the war. So when you go to the Rheingau, the Rhine River was often the border between France and Germany, even up in the Rheingau, so further north. And so a lot of wineries got bombed out, got drunk out, got robbed. Also, the vineyards were destroyed, but often, the guys had to go to war, and the women took care of it in the 20s, right? So you don't have that history where the Mosel was much less involved in all this. So you can go much further back in vineyard sites, but also in especially what wineries have in their basements, and some of them are really going back a long time. But what do we get now today? Today we're going to Germany, and in Germany it's nice and warm. It's almost too warm. We also have to understand the fact there is no irrigation. That means these vineyards, they don't have any water. The water comes from really where it is at rain or hail. There isn't any snow over there, so it is what it is, and so often these vineyards are really, really suffering with the climate change we're having right now. And so when you're now planting actually vineyards, you are going more into the valley, away from the river, to be less exposed and even facing east. So to actually capture exactly the opposite, to going on the cooler side. And that's pretty fascinating that now we even at that latitude, we're coming to a point where it gets fairly too warm. And so we can see that shift. And I'm not surprised to see more and more of these Grand Cru vineyards going away from the river, more into these side valleys to absorb, the cool mornings and the cool afternoons before then the warmth actually comes through. So that's the main change. The colors will definitely change 50 years from now when you look at these Grand Crus. But at this point, a lot of these vineyards are still here and existing. We have the middle definitely is Bernkastel. Trittenheim is going up towards Trier a little more. That's what you probably have a picture of that too. And then you have we have then Trier as the main town along the Mosel. That's where all the auctions are, and that's, so to speak, the capital of the Mosel wine region. When you look here at the this is the Trittenheimer Apotheke. So usually it's a vineyard site. What they're using, Trittenheim is the village. The vineyard site, as you can see, is facing south. German wines had a great reputation in the early 1900s. They were very expensive and they're very sought after. So French Petrus or these high-end chateaus from Bordeaux were not as expensive as the Mosel Rieslings back in the day. So around 1900, 1905, the price per bottle or per barrel, actually back then, was insanely high. Then the wars came. Then one of the with the Jews were the main distribution people actually for German wine. Now with the wars, World War I and II, that really took care of that, and so German wine was not really exposed anymore. Then we went into an overproduction of amounts of sweet Rieslings or Liebfraumilch or whatever you can find in Germany, with zero regulations. And the vineyard side like this here just grew grapes, and there was no home for it. So if you have that, the value of the grapes and the land falls into nowhere's land, and so you pull it out or you just let it go. So what the Germans did, the first thing they did, they actually started to split up these vineyard sites. So you can see suddenly now these rows going through the streets, actually going through the vineyards. So when if you imagine this whole picture here being one vineyard, what they did, they actually built these roads within, and then they actually parceled them up. So you make small parcels, 1 or 2 acres or 1 hectare, each, and they were sold to different wineries. So that's why you can often see this Trittenheimer Apotheke. There's about 20 or 30 producers who actually make Trittenheimer Apotheke wine. But that vineyard only has to manage that 1 hectare, right? Which is pretty cool. So suddenly it's not 100 acres anymore. It's only 1 or 2 acres. So a small winery would have a much better interest and makes much better wine because there's so much less money and time involved. And so that was the first step Germany took to actually to make it approachable, and for the first step to go towards the new law, the German wine law, right, who came in the 1970s, to help to diversify and also qualify for higher levels, also fetch higher prices for your wines. But Trittenheimer Apotheke definitely one of the best situation here. Extremely steep. You drive up and down there on the side, and it's amazing. I mean, you just park somewhere, you sit still and embrace what you can see. You feel the heat in the summer day. The sun is full exposure, so these grapes are going strong. And you would not believe that you are on a very cold German site, right? Usually, especially when you're there in June, July, it can be easily in the 90s up there.
And this picture, it shows kind of what you were talking about, right? You have the bend of the river. It's facing westward, and that slope of like 60 to 70 degrees. You can see how the sunlight reflects from off the river right onto the vineyards. So you could kind of see for yourself how the grapes would grow and how the specific elements, weather elements, and soil elements will impact the flavor profile.
Right.
And for a lot of the people who mostly kind of know California wine regions, they really wouldn't see anything equivalent here in California that you see in the Mosel. And
Right.
that's one of the reasons why Riesling wouldn't be growing at the same, it wouldn't have the same characteristics, which I think are superior characteristics in California as they would in the Mosel.
Right. So just we can even break it down further. So if you talk from the left or right side of the riverbank, you always go with the flow, right? So we look in Luxembourg down. So the Trittenheim is actually on your left side. So you see how the vineyard side has priority. You want to expose everything you can towards the south, and then tell you the Trittenheim is in the shade. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these valleys, they're fairly narrow. And the town itself, it's not the focal point. The focal point really is the vineyard. So the town, you can be really in a hole, so to speak, right? That you don't have sun until 10 o'clock in the morning, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're done again because the sun goes away, right? Behind the next the next turn. Fairly interesting. And you can also see the higher. So when you go up these steep slopes, you can see these are single pole mainly. So these are not on any trellis. One thing. So everything is mainly done by hand. You also obviously the further you go up in a slope way, if you have the topsoil is very thin on the top and is very thick on the bottom, because the runoff of the water and the nutrients, they all go downwards, obviously. So the most expensive and the most expressive Riesling you usually find on the top of the slope. And if you go all the way down to the river, that's usually where you have your generic, your Ortswein or Gutswein, when it doesn't really matter, but you also don't get that much money for it. And even on the slope on the bottom there, you might bring a tractor in, or you can harvest either by harvest by machine, or have a just much easier pick. So the further you go up the hill, the more money you have involved to get the grapes actually down. So very interesting. You can see a lot in just this little picture here.
And Mark, let me pull up the other famous vineyard in the Middle Mosel. That's Wehlener Sonnenuhr.
Yes.
And Sonnenuhr means sundial, which you can see the sundial right there in the middle of the vineyard. And you kind of see the slate that's part of the vineyard. That's the famous slate that the Mosel vineyards are all known for. In fact, I want to ask your opinion. Last year, Wine Spectator named this vineyard as one of the 10 greatest vineyards in the world. What are your thoughts about specifically Wehlener Sonnenuhr and other great sites? Obviously from villages like Graach or Ürzig or Bernkastel. What are the differences between these villages and the vineyards in those villages, and what are the similarities?
Okay. Different angles. You have about 10 questions in one. Wine Spectator takes. They go out and make a bold statement, and for some people they say that's complete bullshit. And some people say, yeah, I totally agree. If you go based on scores, I mean, what are we talking about? Wehlener Sonnenuhr, we're talking about what? J.J. Prüm, right? Yes. J.J. Prüm is probably the biggest producer in the U.S. or the most famous producer when it comes to wines from Germany. Wehlener Sonnenuhr has been around for so long, right? So there is definitely that story from that pot. Yeah, it's correct. The sundial there is from the people working in the vineyard. They have their time when they can go home because it will tell you when it's 5 o'clock. The Sonnenuhr, these vineyards, they're going straight into the Graachner Himmelsreich, right? So there is not really a different mountain formation or a bridge in between. The mountain is continuously going on, and so we have to with 5,000 producers, what can you get and what not? Everybody has a different style, profile, favorite. To say that the Wehlener Sonnenuhr is one of the best vineyards is probably one of the most famous vineyards, I would say. Maybe some of the vineyards you get the most of available in the U.S. market, because that's what the Wine Spectator does incline to. So it's a dangerous speculation, so to speak, because I do believe there is others. I mean, a Trittenheimer Apotheke, I think, is as interesting as the Sonnenuhr. Every vineyard site has maybe a little bit its change with there's two things, how much rocks you have in there, how much slate you have in there, right? Because with the slate, you have the typical gray, in German they call it Schiefer. You have the gray Schiefer in all these vineyards, gray and blue, and then you have the red ones around Ürzig. But I think if you're in the right region right there, I think the Ürzig Gewürzgarten or the Erdener Treppchen, which are just 10 minutes away from the Wehlener Sonnenuhr, or 15 minutes, I think is as spectacular. And it is as great when it comes to a flavor profile. I think it's even more interesting when it comes to diversity, because the Ürzig Gewürzgarten is really a killer site. I think it's a Wine Spectator hype. It's what they taste. It's what they score high. It's what's available. Let's leave it at that. I think physically, I can name you 10 different vineyards which I believe do better. But again, this is all personal style. It's not about good or bad wine. I think the Prüms did a great job. The Prüms have brought, with others like Selbach, Oyster, Molitor, all these big guys, they brought Mosel to the US, and it's rough. I mean, again, in America, I don't believe that Americans understand German Rieslings or Austrian or French Rieslings. I think you need to be much deeper in it. And it's interesting also that's the favorite wine for every sommelier in this world, it looks like. Because one way it's probably also because it's so, it is so diverse. You have it in so many different styles. And I think every single difference in the soil is taken up by that plant and showcases a different angle. And I think that's what makes it fun. But as Germany and Austria, they are going for the vineyard sites. So these Grand Cru sites, they are from these perfect locations, right? They are there for the last 50, 100 years. So they must do something right there. But if you look for the most money you can fetch for, what is it, per square meters, I think we're on the Bernkasteler Doctor. I think that's the most expensive pot on the Mosel there behind the town of Bernkastel. That's what fetches the most money when it comes to vineyard.
So, but what you mentioned is that Grand Cru sites, basically, in a really good vintage, they produce exceptional wines, and the reason they're called Grand Cru sites is because they've been doing that for decades and sometimes centuries. It's kind of proven that specific plots of land make exceptional Riesling.
Correct. Where's your question?
Well, I just want to kind of summarize, what you were saying regarding that. Wehlen, he was kind of like a promotional, I guess, idea for Wine Spectator, but the surrounding villages that have a high reputation as well, they make exceptional wines. But
right.
Not everything in the Mosel is a Grand Cru site.
No.
Other places do not make wines of such high quality.
No, and I think it's number one. I think the more sites you make Grand Cru, the less interesting it gets. Remember, we only like the things we can't have, right? That's the basic on all this. But we can start on the very, very bottom. The average German person who buys a bottle of wine spends €4. So we are talking now about Grand Cru sites of Erste Lage, Grosse Lage, all that stuff. When the basic German, the average German, is so far away from spending the right amount of money, then we're talking here about the crown spots. I think so if we go from that basic knowledge, the sweet spot for every winery. So Igor, you own now a winery on the Mosel. How do you get your how do you get your locals and your tourists into your winery? I think every winery is looking for their Gutswein. So we have Ortswein, that's the village wine. Gut is from the estate. And then we go into the Erste Lage, Grosse Lage, etc. So Orts and Gutswein are usually dry and sometimes a little bit off dry. But that's the catch, that you can go in there and you can produce a 7, 8, 9 euro bottle of wine, which blows off your socks. That's the goal in all this, right? So your customer comes in and comes back to it, because German wine is extremely inexpensive when you look at the money, what goes into a vineyard and what goes into that labor. We also know that if you want to be a Grand Cru site, and more now these days, you need to be organic farming, right? Organic farming in a cool climate as you have in Germany is extremely difficult with all the rains coming back and forth. And so the amount of labor and willingness to do the best for the vineyard, that itself is for me just mind-blowing. So when you have, you satisfied that base group of people who are coming in and they're spending their Sunday afternoon, that wine has to be completely easy drinking, good acidity, a lot of fruit playing around, but don't break your thought about it, right? Just go have a good time. It's 10% alcohol. Don't think too much about it. Spend 10 euros and come back tomorrow. So that's the approach they have to take. And that's why you see more and more these wines, more in distribution, also internationally, and imports and exports, because that's the door opener. It has to be the door opener. When we leave everything in between out, then we go straight to the Grand Cru sites. The Grand Cru sites, the Grosse Lage, it's all dry. So on the Mosel itself, it has to be 100% Riesling. So it cannot be Spätburgunder, it cannot be Weißburgunder, it has to be Riesling. And there is you have to be the Grosse Lage for Grosses Gewächs, the GG, right? Has to be dry. That it means you have 12, 13% alcohol. But these wines are complicated. You need to understand what you're paying for, because, you're suddenly at 50 to 100 euros a bottle easily. But what you get for it is extreme class, it's extreme precision, and an ageability between 30 to 50 to 100 years. Careful on the dry sides there, but the sweet wines, they can go up to 100 years, no problem. So you get a lot for your money. Why? Because especially when the wines are getting sweet and you have this naturally holding fresh acidity in the grapes, showcasing also in the wine, it gives you just a perfect match of, my goodness gracious, if you really understand that grape, they have so much to offer. So if you ever want to lay down a case of wine for your grandkids, right, or for your daughter until she is 21, or your son who is 20 until he's 21 at birth, goodness gracious, don't go to Napa. That winemaking has changed, so these wines are not holding 20 years. But if you are in the section of port or in the section of Riesling, you see both are sweet, both have a decent acidity. You have the aging capacity, which is just insane. And if you see this, nowadays it gets a little more expensive, these German wines, if imports and tariffs. But you get a decent bottle of Kabinett or Gutswein for somewhere around $17-18 in the US. And I think money for what you get, it's a hard time for me to beat that, even locally here.
Hey, Mark, so you covered like a lot in terms of price to quality ratio plus some of the classifications. So can you kind of explain the classification where you have the village wine, Erste Lage, Grosse Lage versus ripeness level like a Kabinett, Spätlese, Auslese, and then what would you say out of the two groups is the best value for somebody who's getting into Riesling to buy?
Right. So so there's two classifications in Germany, and that's the first decision you have to make with yourself. Are you drinking sweet or are you drinking dry? That's the first question you have. Let me tell you that everybody who starts drinking wine likes sweet because it's easy drinking. It's not really edging. You don't need to know much. It's pleasant, and it just makes you happy and giggly and whatever. The minute you come into the dry version, the tannins, the acidity, the structure, the tightness, the tartness can throw you off. So I think trend-wise, if you don't drink much wine, I think you should be on the sweet side. And if you drink and understand wine, I think the dry wines are definitely a very interesting point to look at. When you look at the sweet levels, so then we come into these are called predicats levels, and there we go into when it says Riesling on the bottle with no classification or nothing else, just Riesling, it's usually a wine with maybe 12-15 grams residual sugar, so slightly off dry, very pleasant, good at this acidity, fresh, 10.5-11%. By the way, the higher the alcohol on the bottle, the drier the wine is. So if you look for a really sweet wine, you will see usually 7.5-8.5% alcohol. So you can just turning the label around, you will see if the wine is fairly dry or actually sweet. But you have the Kabinett, then you have the Spätlese, then you have the Auslese. From there you go to Trockenbeerenauslese. And then you can go either higher up with ice wine, etc. But I don't know. You need to understand a lot of wine to appreciate that, because the sugar levels are extremely high. When we come to these levels, you're thinking it's not about how much residual sugar is left in there. It was actually the sweetness level at picking, which qualifies you. So if you pick the grapes in September, over there they have Oxley, so they maybe pick it at 80 or 90 Oxley, and 2 weeks later the same vineyard is about at 100 or 120 Oxley. So that means the ripening stage, so there's more sugar in the grapes. And often when they do make these wines, they go through the vineyard 4, 5, 6 times and just pick what they need based on their sweetness level, and you can see that in the color. But so these are the Kabinett, Spätlese, Auslese, these are the 3 levels you can usually get over here. These are all sweet. Now, when we just talked about the Ortswein and Gutswein, generally on their label, these are the less expensive wines. They are, say, trocken or dry on it. There's some very, very good examples for $20. You can get not only from the Mosel, but also from the Saar, but also from the Nahe. And then you go into the Erste Lage and then the Grosse Lage. And the Erste Lage, these are often older vines, so no new plantings. So it definitely has some history, has some past, has been there's something has been there for a while. And then the Grosse Lage also is often they are on their own rootstock. They've been there for 100 years, clearly exposed. We also have then volume you can pull out of these vineyards, sugar levels, etc. But these classifications, they're pretty intense. Let's put it this way: the higher you go up the pyramid, the more expensive it gets. And the Erste Lage is indication often with a 1G, or then the Grosse Gewächs is called the GG, and you can see that on the bottle itself on the front. So when you grab that bottle, you spend a decent amount of money, and you're drinking for sure a dry wine from a pretty famous, very well managed vineyard site.
All right, Markus. So the final question regarding Mosel: is there a particular favorite of yours? Maybe a producer or site, village, style, anything that you would say like, oh, it's a must to have in my personal cellar?
Well, I'm really not in the producer world. I find certain vineyard sites more interesting. You have the Rheingau, let's say, where it's warmer, so even more exposed to the south side. It's a little bit lower in latitude. There is the Schlossberg. There's some exposed vineyard sites. They're just mind-blowing, nail-biting. You have in the Mosel, in the Saar, I think Zeltingen does an exceptional job. I have several producers coming from the Mosel, which are, even a Selbach oyster or a Klüsselrad. They are nothing special, I would say, but they do it right, and they hit me at a moment where I was just open for something different, I guess. I had an experience or a moment with that bottle of wine, and I think that's all what this is about anyways, is how you remember and what moment did you drink that bottle of wine, and that's where it categorizes for yourself, not really quality style, because we go back to the Prums. They do an exceptionally well wine, but they're starting at $50-$60 these days. And if you're willing to pay that, that's great. Go ahead. But there's so much more to find at 20 or 25. Fritz Haag as an example, or I have so many producers. But Fritz Haag, they make in the 20s. Their basic wines. They're just unbelievable, and ageability. I mean, it's interesting when you go on the auction sites. You have Riesling when they are young. They are the kind of sweet sour game, right? So it's sweet and it's sour with the acid in it. They're fresh and they have a very good viscosity. So you take a sip and immediately you want a second one. That's how good wine has to be, right? So it needs to have the second glass. After about 5 years, these wines are getting into a mute phase. So the fruit explosion goes away. So what remains is that acidity with just a little bit of sweetness, but you have no profile, no character. And so most of these Rieslings then go on the auction because they say, well, we passed that window. That thing is done. Let's get rid of it, right? But you give that bottle 10 years in total. So after 10 years after release, that wine opens up again. And my goodness, then you go into the tertiary aromatics, right? When you get that creme brulee, you get that that nuttiness, that just unbelievable, even with a little bit of diesel in it, right? It is a complete 100% different wine. And I'm drinking here a 2009 Kabinett, and you think like, wow, for what is that, $15-$16? That wine probably can go out the window now. This has been open for 6-7 days. It drinks like I opened it yesterday, and it's fresh and it's vibrant and has that color, right? It turns the color a little bit now into golden, but what a beauty. So you can't ask for anything else, right? We always think, oh, the color goes bad. and then you have to throw it out. But no, these wines are coming alive because acidity. And also, I can go really geek out in this thing and go into lease management in the winery, right? Where it absorbs and makes it really, really ageability times 10. And that makes a difference. I think they know what they're doing over there. So instead of going back to your question, instead of giving you names of what you should go and buy, I think is buy five. I would go buy 5 different bottles: a Gutswein, an Ortswein, a Spätlese, a Kabinett, and an Auslese. Find the level. Go to the 4. Take 4 different valleys. So a different stylistical part again. The Nahe is like Donhof, right? I mean, it's pretty widely available here. Killer stuff coming out of that region. And give them some time, and then find your own favorite. No matter what, I think if you understand the wine, you can't go wrong if you like sweet. And then when it comes to food, right, it is always the spicy factor. It's, sweet wine or milk, the glass of milk. It's the famous 2 things which go with sweet, hot, and spicy, because it actually takes off a little bit of that edge of that spiciness, right? Where water actually just dumbs it down but doesn't go away. So when you have actually dry wine and spicy food, you enhance the tannins, so the wine turns into bitterness. And so it really throws you off when the wine tastes alcoholic and bitter. Versus if you have sweet wine with some spicy food, it actually matches. Just heaven, just simply heaven.
Yeah, great with a Thai cuisine or maybe Indian cuisine.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. But do you really see people walking with a German bottle, into a Thai restaurant? Hell no. But maybe you should, right? I mean, there's some really good wine stores here in California, online or around if you're close to bigger cities. They offer German wines, and I think it's a very approachable wine.
Oh, it's a great wine. I couldn't pick a favorite from German Riesling as well.
Right, you could or you could not.
What?
You could or you could not.
I could not. Yeah, it's a lot of different producers and a lot of different, obviously, villages with the great vineyards inside of them, and they have a distinctive profile. And the same thing you're saying, they're beautiful young and beautiful in a completely different way when they become more mature. So it's just an amazing grape.
Yeah, I think it's personal, and which is perfectly fine, right? And that's one thing I always judge people on is why you always go through the producer, why it always has to be a score. I mean, I understand if you have 10 Rieslings next to each other, you have obviously all the same price point, and now you have the wine spectator coming in and giving 1 to 95, and 93, and 92. At the bottom end, it doesn't really matter what the wine spectator thinks, because it's your palate and it's your desire level where you go with. But on the other hand, if you have $20 to spare and you don't want to put it on the wrong wine, well, you may want to bet it on the wine somebody else liked. So that's the power of points. But once you start drinking and learning what you like, screw these points, because it's really all what you like, what you taste, how you take it. Because that's the most important thing. You can have a 100-point wine and be completely disappointed what you get, because it doesn't match it doesn't beat your expectations. And that's, I think, the key. Or it was open at the wrong time or at the wrong moment. But then you can buy a $5 bottle of wine and you have that perfect moment with another person together, and it just sits and it fits. That wine has much more value suddenly as the 100-point wine.
I noticed that points, it's very subjective. And sometimes there's kind of this obvious power to the wines that garners a certain score. But I think what the great wines have are subtlety. And subtlety is very hard to explain in a tasting note. It's something you kind of have to taste. And subtlety also comes when you have to taste a lot of different things. If you're a novice, I don't think you'll be able to pick up subtlety. It's only when you taste lots of different things that the nuance and the subtlety of a great wine really creeps up on you. That's kind of what my experience been like.
Right, I believe that that these scores, they are helping you to direct your mind. It gives you a certain comfortness, right? The comfort zone where, hey, in the 92, 93 points, it can't be all that bad, right?
Yeah.
And definitely true that the bigger sites and the bigger and the higher scores, often they have it year over year, right? Even better. That they prove the point that that these wines are much more, much better made. But at the end of the day, I have to tell you that a lot of people have no idea what they're drinking.
Correct. So, but when we're drinking.